This conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our 27th, I believe it is, Wardens, Treasurers, Clergy call for a COVID-19 update. Great to see you here today on this beautiful sunny day. So let's get our meeting started with prayer. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we give you praise and thanksgiving for the gift of this beautiful day and for all that is a part of it. In the light and the glory of this day, we give thanks for this season of Epiphany, this season of light and manifestation and hope, and for the presence of your Son, Jesus Christ, with us each and every day by the power of his holy and life-giving Spirit. I ask you to be with the wardens, treasurers, and the clergy of our diocese as we gather today, as we continue to move our way through the challenges of these days. Strengthen and encourage us, give us wisdom, vision, insight, as we lead the people committed to our care. And in Jesus' holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Well, again, welcome to everybody today. It's great to have you here, and not too much again, just we continue to move through these days. We are continuing in lockdown and stay-at-home orders. It's wonderful to see the numbers over the last few days have started to come down, which is great to hear. As for all of Eastern Ontario, the numbers are absolutely tremendous, and we are seeing, and that's, I think, really a tribute to the care and attention that's being given to this across the 4 counties that make up our diocese and the health regions that are there. And so we continue to give thanks for our frontline healthcare workers and for the officers of health that are working here, and we continue to move forward through this. And a couple of things that we want to bring up today and discuss. And so without any further ado on that, I want to throw it over to Alec, and I believe we're going to have some conversation about pandemic financial review and also talking about annual vestry meetings and vestry lists and things like that. So anyway, throw it over to Alec and look forward to any Q&A that comes at the end of the meeting.
Right, thank you, Bishop. So just as I think nobody is missing the point, but we are still in the red stage, which we entered over a month ago. The provincial shutdown is at this point scheduled to end on February the 11th. I think we all know it's certainly possible that it ends there. It's also possible that the shutdown is either extended or in some way modified. So we really can't bank on that. One of the major things, as the bishop mentioned, the numbers are improving across the province, and they are very solid across this diocese. I think this morning when I listened to the numbers or looked at them, we're less than 50 across the 3 health units that make up our great diocese. Trying to find who that is. Just a sec. So if you're not on, if everyone's on mute, I think I've got most muted, but wow.
Do you want to mute it? Okay.
There we go. So, and of course, the one concerning thing is that there is the new variant that is in the province that originated in the UK. And if you read the press on these things, there are 2 other variants of great concern. One that's reached the United States from South Africa, and another that's reached the United States from Brazil. And both of these, while no more, if you'll pardon the expression, deadly or no more impactful, the common thing in these variants is that they are far more contagious. And so I think that draws us back to, even as we go forward, that the care we take is going to be critical, because the newer variants are even more contagious. So our buildings remain closed. The halls and the rentals are suspended. There's public worship as well. But just highlighting again that Insurance company does expect that buildings are going to be inspected every few days, just to make sure that there's nothing untoward going on, and also there is access allowed for normal maintenance work. So one of the other impacts, and we spoke on this the last meeting, is on annual meetings. And of course, if we're still in a red stage, only an online meeting would be possible. Even when we come out of this if we went back to the amber stage, we would have capacity limits that would exist as they do today for how many people can gather. And so that could be a major restriction. For some churches, that wouldn't be an issue. If your hall or church holds, the capacity was 20 and your annual vestry meeting typically had 15, there's no issue. If your building is permitted 50 and your annual vestry meeting would typically have 80 or 100, there's an issue. So as the guidelines that came out 2 weeks ago, it's with the wardens and the incumbent to really look and select the right model for their annual meeting based upon their local needs, their own vestry list, and the realities of their church. But again, reminder that you still need to take your vestry list, and we'll speak about vestry lists in a moment. But your vestry list, and you need 25% of that list for quorum. And of course, you still need to provide at least 2 Sundays of notice to everyone that there is an annual meeting coming. So we reviewed these in detail a couple of weeks ago. Not going to dwell on that today, other than, again, if you're going purely online, choosing the right platform or the right meetings software, making sure that you have all the right things in place in terms of microphones, cameras, and displays. The documents are distributed to people well in advance. And then just, again, rehearse. Practice makes perfect. And you find the technical glitches as you go. And then hybrid meetings being when some people are in a together and the rest of people are online. So the guidelines were issued 2 weeks ago. That includes some resources on the COVID hub from the worship committee, intended as well to try and take a service of worship and then fit the essentials of the annual meeting and work all of that into an hour. After an hour, of course, in a public gathering, that's when the risks increase for extended exposure. Of course, online, the meeting can be as long as you'd like, or as long as your vestry will tolerate. Mark Hauser is available for technical consulting if you're looking at what platform or what types of devices. You can apply to the bishop for dispensation if there are specific circumstances that'll prevent you by the March 15th date set out in the canons. And again, you need to provide a window of when you're looking to have that meeting, so that it's not just an indefinite dispensation. But for example, it could say that the meeting would be held 2 weeks after we are able to return to public worship. And that 2 weeks, of course, would meet the notification window. And then just a reminder again that once the annual meeting's done, the incumbent's responsible for getting the information sheet into the diocese. So one of the discussions that came up has been, how do you deal with the vestry list? And if you look at our canons, and I'm sure everyone does on a regular basis, that the incumbent and the wardens are responsible for preparing the vestry list. And that's supposed to happen by the week after the 1st of December. And that list is to be, if requested, posted in the church. The idea of this is so that everyone's aware who's on the list, and much like when an election is going to be held federally, provincially, that there is that voters list and you're notified So you have the opportunity, if you feel you should be on it and aren't, it can be dealt with ahead of time. The normal requirements to be on the vestry list are that you must be a member of the Anglican Church of Canada as defined in the canons, or an adherent to the Anglican Church of Canada, 16 years old or older, identifying that you're a member of that congregation. Regular worshipers in that congregation for at least 3 months prior to the vestry, having received the sacrament of Holy Communion at least 3 times in the 12 months prior, and that you have not voted in another vestry or don't in the last 3 months, or don't intend in the next year to vote in another vestry. And again, these were all focused on ensuring that people that are identified members and are part of the life of that church are on the vestry list. And of course, every year we get questions on vestry membership. Normally those questions come when there is something a little more controversial, or there's a discussion or a vote at vestry that there are different camps on, or that the wardens would feel that there may be disagreement over. So we try to be clear on what those are, but also by the canon, if there's any kind of dispute, the wardens and incumbent have the authority to consider and settle any dispute on who's entitled to be on that list. There is fallback to an appeal to the diocesan court of contested seats. To our knowledge, no one can recall that has ever been the case. But there is a court of appeal. Normally, it's the role of the wardens and the incumbent to settle that. So in looking at the unique times for 2021, it creates some unique circumstances. For example, there are people who have chosen for their own health concerns not to return physically to church since last March, when we first went into the building shutdown. And those people haven't received communion by the time some meetings roll around, a year or very close to that. And of course, that would, the canon as it exists would preclude those people from being on the vestry list. Obviously, that's not what we want to have happen. The goal is that anyone who is a legitimate member of that church should be able to attend, participate, and vote at the annual vestry meeting. So as most of you should have all received last week, there was a draft document put together on vestry lists, and that was there as a draft and clearly marked for input, because we wanted to consult and make sure that we had the broad perspective from the churches. There was some input come back. Tuesday night, Synod Council met and considered that document and how to move forward. And Synod Council made a change to the document. So here's the basic gut of that. You should receive that. If you haven't already, it's going out today. The basic qualifications have been amended slightly. And so those that were previously on the 2020 vestry list should remain so, unless they've advised the church that they no longer wish to be a member. Those who've joined the church since last year's vestry list would be eligible to be on the vestry list if they meet the normal requirements, or if they're in a position to sign a modified declaration. And that declaration says that they solemnly declare that they've been a member of the Anglican Church of Canada as defined in Canon 1, that they have regularly attended scheduled services of worship either in person or online with this congregation for at least 3 months, and have, unless precluded solely by pandemic regulations or their own health and safety concerns during the pandemic, received the sacrament of Holy Communion at least 3 times. and that they're of the full age of 16 and that they've not voted as a member and don't intend to vote in another vestry. So this is intended to allow for people that may have come into our church communities over the last 10, 12 months that have only been able to physically be there. And again, intending that those are people who have not just randomly watched, but people who have become part of the life of the church. And again, the warden's incumbents and the incumbent have full authority over the vestry list. So there's the document with that. If you don't have it already, you will have it soon. So jumping over to some financial issues, the wage subsidy. So in the month of December, the good news was that across the diocese, it was 5.4% reduction in income, which was only $41,000. Of course, that's the good news. The bad news is that, it didn't generate a significant wage subsidy because when you use the federal government's formula, it's only 4.3% of the wages. So that amounted to $12,709 in total, of which just under $10,000 will be going out to parishes on the invoices for December, which will come out for January, which will come out early in February. Data collection for January is the normal process, Feb the 15th. The form should be on the website. And one change there is we're looking to break some of them down so we report by church, not just in parish in some cases. So one of the areas that beyond SUS that we've talked about before, and I wanted to take a minute and give you a little bit of detail on, was the pandemic church financial support. And so back in when this all began in March, we went back and with council's blessing, appointed a pandemic financial support team. That team put some proposals together that went to council in June, and which have now, after the team taking a look at the data for March to December, has now worked its way back to council. And again, the focus of this, as directed by council mid last year, was to look at the churches that are most impacted by the income decline, but also then the ones that have limited internal financial resources to sustain through that. And finally, for those that have an active outreach and ministry focus. So of course, there's been some support in place already with the insurance interest forgiveness, the tech grants, and the building reopening starter kits. This next step is to look at specific financial support and how that could be worked through. So that group is made up of Canon Peter Case, and of course, Peter's the chair of our audit committee and our investment committee, and a past chair of our finance committee. The Venerable Charles Morris, who's the Archdeacon in the East, Territorial Archdeacon in the East End of Ontario, or the Diocese of Ontario. Canon Michael Reed, who again has played a wide range of roles in the diocese at St. Lawrence Brockville. Robin Jones, who's a warden at St. Paul's Westport, member of Synod Council. Venerable Wayne Varley, Archdeacon of Ministry and Program, and myself as the Executive Officer, Financial Officer. So that's the group that has worked this through. The guiding principles is to make some assistance and support available to all churches, but then use our available funds to support churches that have been most financially impacted with the least ability to sustain and that have an outward focus on mission and ministry. So this gives you an idea of the resource that we have available to work with. So as we've spoken to before, every dollar of wage subsidy that's been received for the diocesan staff, and that includes the bishop, myself, Wayne, and the rest of the diocesan staff, with the exception of Mimi Merrill, the doors coordinator, that money has been credited back to the doors budget. So the total for the 8 of us that was generated was $111,700. To this point, the funding has been used $4,800 for insurance interest forgiveness, $6,800 in the tech grants, and $3,200 in the starter kits for cleaning and disinfecting. So just under $15,000 has been expended out of that fund, leaving us with a balance of $96,000 at the end of, just under $97,000 at the end of December. And what we did was we placed that money in a restricted fund. So we moved it from our income and expense side over to our balance sheet so we could carry it across the end of the year. We placed it in a restricted fund so that money could only be expended at the direction of Synod Council. So just looking at the support that's been in place for parishes through the pandemic, the SUS subsidy, there was $538,000 to the end of the year that has been directly transferred into parishes for the wage subsidy that was created from the stipend, the salaries, the housing, that benefits that were in that particular church or parish. The online worship tech grant we've talked about, the interest on insurance forgiveness we've talked about, and the starter kits. So to give you just an overview of what the numbers look like. So for the year, when I use the term gross income, that's the raw number of how much the income went down by. So in total, it was $714,000. This is all churches across the whole diocese. You can see the distribution of that. First quarter, which was January, February, March, was about 80,000. In the second quarter, it was, which is April, May, June, just under 310,000. So a really tough one. From Q3, which is July, August, September, was 188,000. In the fourth quarter, October, November, December, was 135,000. So you can see how that broke out, where the most significant income hits were across the year. But of course, SUS was also a source of income. And so if you look at that first chart now and net out the SUS that was provided, in the first quarter, there was actually a net gain. So church income went up by $53,000 as the result of SUS. In the second quarter, which as you recall was the toughest of them, that number was 53. In the third quarter, which is when SUS started to shift, the way that the SUS was calculated by the government, that became 72. In the fourth quarter, then SUS became even less, and that generated just under $100,000 of loss. So the total across them, right, netted was just about $170,000 for the year if you take the gross income reduction and factor in SUS. This is a very busy chart, I know, but each dot on this chart is a church. And what this does is it places the gross, which is just a raw income reduction as reported by the church, on the chart. And so what you can see is there was less than a handful of churches that actually had income increases. There was a few that were just a little better, and then a wide range from there. So I look at two numbers to help describe this. The average church decrease was just over $13,000. The median, and of course the median is, when you're looking at numbers like this, half of the churches were above it, half of the churches were below it. And so the line for median sits just over $10,000. And you can see how they're distributed on that chart. And if you look at that from a percentage basis, compared to the prior year, what you can see is that again, the distribution of a very small number above, some right around the zero line, but the average decrease was 18,000, and the median, half above, half below, was a reduction of 20%. If you now look at it net of SUs, so this is the income reduction, and then we add to income, we add back SUs. So what you see is some fairly dramatic change. If you look now, there are a good number of churches that actually ended up positively year over year as the result. So with the factor of the reduction hit, but more than offset by SUs. And then below the line, of course, things move inwards a bit, and there's not quite the same wide distribution. And so now the average decline by church was about $3,000, and the median line, half above, half below, about $2,200 decline. Percentage-wise, net of SUs, you're now at about 7% reduction on average, and the median line is at 6%. The other thing that we've been trying to monitor to look at church health has been bank balances. So when we first recorded or requested and received the bank balances was in May, there was 1.1 million roughly of money being held in church bank accounts. By the end of December, that number has risen about 80% and is now 1.9 million. And so clearly there's been money held in the church accounts. There's been limited withdrawals from the investment fund apart from the normal. There are certain churches that withdraw money every year. There's always things that occur, but the level of withdrawal from the investment fund really is not significantly different year over year. Of course, part of that would be relating to the fact that as well as income being down, and I think you're all recognizing some expenses are down as well, that the mileage has not been as much, that in some cases heating bills, et cetera, because the building's not being used, in other cases because there's not some activities. So in general, that reflects that the churches have been able to build bank balances. So the process that was put forward by PFRT and then ratified by Synod Council was that there'd be a lot of analysis, which we've done, and then we would pass through a set of filters. So the first filter is the income reduction. So looking at that and saying, is a church's financial reduction of income reduction greater or less than a threshold? And then the second filter is what resources they have available to them financially. And that was generally factored as investments, plus bank balances, less whatever's owed to the diocese. Because of course, looking at a bank balance, when money's owed is kind of, you need to factor in what is owed as well. So that's what that threshold was. And the third one would be a ministry and viability assessment. So that's the third filter. Those first two that are circled there are what was presented to council the other night, the analysis that went through that. Churches that don't pass through the threshold, that are above it, would be eligible, would continue to be eligible for any general support, such as the tech grants and things like starter kits, any things we do broadly. Churches that that are the ones that have higher reductions with less ability to sustain would then move to the third phase. And so to give you a feel for what that looks like, there was 17, we set the reduction level based on the averages you saw on those earlier charts, net of SUs. We set that at 10%, and there was 17 churches that passed through that level. We then at the second level looked at churches that passed through that one. We set the ratio of the church's annual budget divided by, or sorry, their investments and bank balances less their owing, divided by the amount of their bank balance investment funds as we know them, and less the receivables. So what that creates, if you want to think of it simply, is a ratio of how many years of income does a church have invested or have available to them as a financial resource. So, and that would be saying that the threshold we set is 2.4 years. That says a church could go 2.4 years with no more income and still meet their budget for expenses. So that's kind of what that threshold was designed to get at. And there was 27 churches in the diocese that had less than 2.4 years. So then you look at what churches meet both of them, and there are 10 churches that do so. And again, as a check, and just a quick, does it make sense? We looked at, of that 10 churches, what does that represent? Well, those 10 churches represent $134,000 of the $170,000 decline in net decline in income. So those 10 churches represent about 80% of the net income reduction across the diocese. So for us, that was a good check to make sure it did indeed make sense. So those 10 churches will now be invited to now proceed to this third stage. Wayne, are you on the line?
I am.
Wayne, do you want to speak to this one?
Yes, Alec, I'd be happy to. Friends, it's good being with you. The Ministry and Mission Survey is meant to affirm and encourage congregations. In fact, any congregation parish may make use of this document. The 10 congregations or parishes that are eligible for financial support from the Church Support Fund will be required to complete this. We hope to have it sent out sometime next week, because the goal is to provide the financial assistance as quickly as possible by beginning after the February meeting of Synod Council. So it's a document that gauges viability. It also has a sense of what is God calling your church to be and do this year and beyond. It is based on the church's marks of mission and the Healthy Church's Handbook by Robert Warren. It goes on with a series of questions that will be, as I said, sent to you. And again, we hope to have that out to you next week. Two pieces of this that are critical again is, what do you perceive God is calling your church to be and do? and also identify some of the good things that are happening and did happen in the life of the congregation in 2020 as you move forward. Thanks, Alec.
Thanks, Wayne. And so that process, as Wayne mentioned, will begin next week. And so as part of that, the church will work through that. There'll be a consultation with the territorial archdeacon. That'll then all come back to the PFRT. They'll be reviewed with the bishop. And then from all of that will come a summary and recommendations to Synod Council. And as Wayne mentioned, the goal is to get there so that can go to council for February meeting, and so that we can move forward quickly. So a few quick items for you. 2021 invoices for insurance. We've actually, as part of our process changes, we're actually going to get that done quicker than normal. So those are going to go out this week. You should receive your package this week. It will contain a letter describing it. It'll contain the invoice, which is based on the Aon invoice, and then adds the things like the deductible reduction, the subsidy program from last year. So last year, as you recall, we changed the way that the allocation was done to more of an actual system. So those churches last year that got a subsidy will get one this year. It'll be 50% of what it was last year. Those churches that paid into the subsidy fund will pay in half what they did last year. And this will be the last year for that program as council directed. You'll also have your insurance certificate in there and the detail of all your coverage. So that will all arrive for you hopefully tomorrow. And as we spoke last year, there's been a significant increase from ecclesiastical on the premiums. Some increase on the liability side, which is fixed for all churches, but based on claims history and the global insurance market, we see about a 20% net increase in insurance premiums this year. So please be prepared for that. In addition, several of our churches that sit within what are classified as either a flood zone or a earthquake zone will see incremental increases on top of that, as well as changes in deductibles for some of those things. So we are still working with Aon and ecclesiastical. I just met yesterday nationally on some of this. It's not a situation we want to be in. Unfortunately, we are somewhat limited in options because there are very few insurers now that will take on churches, because churches represent a unique set of risks. And whether that risk is some of the older historic buildings, whether that risk is the legacy of abuse and inappropriate acts, in some cases the remote locations that mean that fire response and fire hydrants and all those kinds of things, all of those factor into this. That makes it a thin market. The Diocese of Huron was previously insured with Aviva, and Aviva notified them last year that they would no longer insure churches. They've jumped to ecclesiastical and seen a significant jump. So we're kind of boxed. We are working to find ways for next year to try and reduce the impact, or find ways to make it more effective for us. And we'll talk more about that later in the year, but I'm chairing a working group provincially that's working on that. There are still 10 incumbents, priests in charge, that we Joyce does not have back the stipend housing changes for 2021. So I'd ask, please, if you're warden thereof or clergy, to please get together and get that completed and into Joyce, because it does create a fair bit of incremental work, because Joyce has to go back, calculate the adjustment, and then of course you're going to get a higher bill come February. Reminder that information sheets are due back in within the time period after the annual meeting, and clergy certifying synod delegates. This is a synod year, so that becomes an important piece. But those information sheets are really key for us in terms of making sure we're communicating with the right people. And whether that's a broad communication like this one, or whether that's a specific set of issues or within a church or some specific matters relating to a church, if we don't have the right addresses, the right email address, the right phone numbers, and the right people, that's not really able to happen. Final thing is that it's not going to happen in the next month or so, but just a heads up, we are going to change the platform that we're using. We use today on this call, we've been using all along GoToMeeting. And what we are doing, the diocese has moved its infrastructure over to Microsoft. We've now moved all of our record management and record keeping in the office over to what's known as SharePoint. And we've moved, while we meet as staff every day online, we use Teams, Microsoft Teams, for our staff meetings. We use it for collaboration. So as we're working on things, we can be chatting back and forth, sharing stuff back and forth, and video and conferencing back and calling each other. That's where we're invested. So what we want to do is eventually move this meeting over. It'll give us some incremental capabilities, and it will also save us some money. And of course, what we're doing is a lot of these infrastructure changes are about either saving money or increasing the capability we have. So that'll be coming, and what I'll do is we will take the last of the meetings we have on GoToMeeting, and we'll do a quick training session on how you'll be able to get into this meeting via Microsoft Teams. Pretty straightforward. If you're some of those that are on committees that I'm working with are already meeting with Microsoft Teams. And with that, we now turn back for Q&A. So the bishop and Wayne and I are available for questions. If you're on the phone and want to ask a question, it's star or the password, whatever you care to call that, 6, and to mute, and then please repeat that to go back on mute. If you're on the video side or on the internet connection, you can mute yourself or unmute yourself and then mute yourself back. And of course, the chat line is there, and Laura, as always, is online to moderate that and ask questions on people's behalf. A lot of content. I will open to questions.
Alex, it's Don Roblin, St. Paul's, Queen Street, Kingston. I have a question about, in a previous meeting, you mentioned, well, I wrote down the CPI, the cost of living was around 2.1%. I think I've mixed it up. We have a budget meeting tonight, and I budgeted for 2%, and I'm finding in StatsCan stuff 1%. Which one is correct? What should I be using?
So, and again, depending upon which bundle you use, right? And so for clergy stipend, we use 2.1 because that includes things like food and a number of other sort of household type things. If you're looking at things that a church would be expending, office supplies and utilities and those sorts of things, then I think it's fair to use one of the different statistics. If it's, if, you know, which 1% sounds low, but I think it depends on which bundle you look at. What you do locally is really your decision. But I would, again, from a budgeting perspective, my advice is always to be conservative, budget a little higher, because it's better to come in below budget than it is to go over. And by the way, the housing allowance moved 2.3 because that's what the StatsCan number was. By the way, the other thing is the period that we used is actually a year out of sync. So what we did was we used that 2.1 represented January of 2020, looking back a year. So we're always, that's the way the diocese has done it historically, is casting back a year. So that 2.1 reflected what basically what 2019 was for inflation. If
Thank
you're
you.
looking at current, you'd probably see a lower number.
Okay.
Other questions? Laura, do we have anything on the chat line?
No, there's nothing in the chat yet.
I have a question.
Okay.
Alex, I was wondering, we're seeing that on the e-news that diocesan technology grants are available. Is to clarify, that is for now for the current year for 2021?
That is correct. We felt that the response was good. And what we've done is expanded the scope a bit from purely online worship, which is what it was targeted for originally, to dealing with the challenges of in-person worship when we get back to that, that are technical in nature. So, for example, you know, some churches have discovered that because there was no paper, no longer books in the pews, some churches that previously hadn't moved to projectors or screens needed to do so. So the grant's there to help with that. Other churches found that their PA system that needed to be upgraded to deal with people reading lessons, preaching sermons, and otherwise speaking with a mask on. But you needed some better microphones to be able to move so that people could hear a little better. So those grants are available for things that support the in-church worship experience as far as the impact of COVID. But that program continues, and we have set aside money in 2021 for that.
Excellent. Supplementary question. If we are interested in pursuing something like a cold weather heat pump, which enables us to reduce our heating bills by 50%, at the same time as respecting the fifth mark of mission to safeguard creation, then I was wondering what kind of grants are available from the diocese for that.
So at this time, the diocese really doesn't have any grants around that would support that kind of thing. There is, of course, the capital loans available to churches. So a church can borrow up to $40,000 and take 10 years to pay it back. But at this point, there are no grants available really for anything building related, including that type of initiative.
Nothing from, say, from the Anglican Foundation or the Diocesan Foundation?
Those different matters there. And I think in general, both foundations, I won't speak for them, but have been trying to steer away from bricks and mortar stuff. However, I think both foundations look try to look fairly positively on green initiatives. So that might actually be that I would say you should inquire of that. I think I saw Bill Clark on this call. Bill, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear
Can
me?
you speak to that on behalf of the
Yes.
as the chair? Can you speak on behalf of the Diocesan Foundation?
Thus far, you've been correct, Alex. We've been moving away from bricks and mortar issues, other than around the issue of accessibility to our churches and to more mission and ministry focus. But I've been promoting the idea of some sort of green initiative as a possibility. The question simply, again, for us will be, do we have the funds to do that? So sure, by all means, put in an application and we'll give it some serious consideration.
And
Thank you.
Just by way of mention, and I know he's not on this call, but the bishop has appointed Reverend Canon Dr. Bob Wright as our diocesan representative to the National Church Foundation. So, and Bob's available as a resource, but again, I think the National Foundation, similar to what Bill's described for the diocesan, in general is steering away, but green initiatives may have a different, there may still be some opportunity. We do,
Thank
of course, have 3 annual grants to the National Foundation. We have 3 available slots. It's a new calendar year. We've re-triggered there.
Thank you.
Laura, I see the chat popping up.
Yes, there are a few questions regarding the tech grant. So just to clarify, for parishes who received a tech grant in 2020, can they also apply for 2021?
And again, our answer is we're trying to support churches in doing the right things, and we've expanded the scope. So I think the decision we made was yes, those that received last year, if it's for a new initiative this year, then we would consider that. Yep.
And can churches apply for the tech grant for projectors and screens that were purchased for in-person services in September of 2020?
So now we want a back date. We really didn't expand the grant program. That really didn't work through till November, December. So I'd say September, no. But if it's something that you did later on in the year, then we would consider it. Any other questions, Laura?
Nope, that's it in the chat.
Last call on the.
I have a question, Alex. It's Darlene Cunliffe from Parish of North Hastings.
Hi, Darlene.
If the province does indeed lift the lockdown February 11th, what does that mean for us? How soon might we move to the amber stage again and be able to resume worship in our churches? I'm thinking in terms of, here we are entering into Lent and trying to plan ahead. So just need some guidelines, I guess.
So the plan is, of course, February the 11th, coincidentally, is 2 weeks from today. So
yes.
we will plan on a call on February the 11th. It's hard to say anything definitive. The bishop and Wayne and I talked about this morning. It's difficult to say anything definitively because there's several layers to this. The province will take actions. We don't know, based on where we are today and where we'll be on the 10th of December, what actions and restrictions the province may place or release. The second thing is, of course, that the 3 health units in our diocese will also have, directives and guidance, and that will depend on the local situation. So our intention is that, obviously what we want to do is when we can safely go back to the amber stage, right, which would be what we would be doing, is returning to our amber stage guidelines, not the province's amber, that we would do so. If all other factors are so, then one can assume that we would return right after that. But it's too difficult right now to predict where we will be given everything that's going on in 2 weeks. But we will have a call on the 11th and with the view of the world from there.
Okay.
Bishop, do you have
Thank
any
you.
other comment you want to make to that?
Yeah, I think you covered it. I mean, we discussed it this morning and the uncertainties. I mean, things are looking really good across Eastern Ontario. And my hope and prayer is that when we get to the meeting on the 11th, we can say that, the province is reopening, and we don't know quite yet what they're going to be doing. The numbers are looking good, initial numbers into the lockdown. But then there's the whole wild card of these variants, UK, Brazilian variants that are starting to make their presence felt. And we've seen in Barrie, for example, the horrific news coming out of the long-term care home there, where all but 2 of staff and residents have been infected, and it's this UK variant that has made its way here. So it's still early around that to see where that's going to go, the vaccination rollouts and all of the uncertainty around that. So we figure that we'll know as we move towards the 11th. So as we get there, I'm fairly certain we'll be getting good indication where the numbers are going and where the province will be headed. But we figure it's opportune that we're going to be having this meeting on the 11th, and we'll know whether the lockdown's being extended or whether it's finished or whether they're going to go to a piecemeal kind of approach in the province. But as Alex says, it's difficult. My hope is we go to reopen, and then you're back into in person in our amber phase by the 14th. And again, that has to be if you can reasonably do that within your setting. Again, that would be something that the local leadership then would decide. Are we ready to go back then? Do we want to put it off? There are some who delayed when we did the initial reopening, and some who felt, it just depends on the situation at that time. But we think it's very opportune that we're going to be having that meeting on the 11th with all of you, so we should be able to get the best information we can to you and have that discussion then.
Okay, well, of course, as always, the recordings from this meeting, as well as the chart package, will go up on the COVID hub within the next 24 hours. Or at least by tomorrow morning. Usually we try and get it up later today, but it takes an hour just to process the recording. So if you wish to reference anything or pointing to someone that wasn't able to attend the call. So we will meet again in 2 weeks' time, which, as we said, is coincidentally the 11th, which is the date the province lifts or has stated that the shutdown will end, whatever's on the other side. So thank you all for attending. Bishop, can we come back to you for our closing?
Certainly. Thank you very much, everybody, and for being here with us today. And please continue to hold everyone in your prayers over this time. I'd also ask you to hold my colleague, Bishop Michael Hawkins of the Diocese of Saskatchewan. You remember I had sent out a prayer request for Bishop Michael. He had COVID and was in intensive care and returned home. He has now been readmitted to hospital, and that news just came out within the last hour or so. So I'm going to be having a phone call coincidentally with the Archbishop of Rupert's Land in another half an hour on another matter. So hopefully I can find out some more information, and if Michael wishes to have a more public prayer request to go out, but we just got that notice to the House of Bishops to hold him in prayer because he's gone back into hospital again. So again, this disease is miserable and pernicious, and especially with these variants that are coming up. And we have to keep our vigilance through this time, and we carry on. We will get through this. So as we conclude today, let us all join together in the grace. For the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit, be with us all.
Amen.
Everyone, have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Goodbye, everybody. George and Barb saying goodbye.
Bye.